The dust clouds on the horizon told a story that every citizen of Babylon had learned to fear. Yet on this morning, as the sun cast its golden light across the magnificent ziggurat of Marduk, King Hammurabi III stood on his palace balcony with an expression that puzzled even his closest advisors. The promised safety he was about to offer his people would come in words that none expected, words that would leave the greatest city in Mesopotamia questioning everything they believed about strength and survival. Below, in the bustling marketplace, merchant Miriam adjusted the scales that weighed precious silver while her 16-year-old daughter Leah helped arrange pottery from distant lands. The morning had begun like any other, with traders haggling over grain prices and scribes recording transactions on clay tablets. But whispers traveled faster than wind through the narrow streets between mud brick houses. 50,000 warriors, murmured one trader to another. They burned Sippar to the ground, added a woman carrying water from the Euphrates. 3 cities fallen in 2 weeks, confirmed a caravan master who had witnessed the destruction firsthand. Commander Asher paced the walls of Babylon, his weathered hands gripping the stone battlements as he surveyed the defenses that had protected the city for generations. His 38 years had been spent in service to 3 kings, and he had never seen walls trembling not from siege engines, but from the fear that crept through every household like morning mist. The massive gates of cedar and bronze looked suddenly fragile against reports of an enemy that showed no mercy to man, woman, or child. In the temple district, High Priest Darius knelt before the golden statue of Marduk, offering prayers that had sustained Babylon through countless trials. His aging fingers clutched sacred tablets containing laws and wisdom passed down through generations. Yet even these holy walls seemed to echo with uncertainty, as refugees from neighboring cities sought sanctuary, bringing tales of horror that made the strongest men weep. Young Ezra, the royal scribe, sharpened his reed stylus with trembling hands as he prepared to record what might be the most important royal decree in Babylon's history. The 25-year-old had grown up believing that kings protected their people with armies and fortifications. But as he climbed the steps to the great assembly hall where King Hammurabi would address the nation, he sensed that everything he had learned about power and protection was about to change forever. The bronze horns echoed across Babylon, summoning every citizen to hear their king's response to the approaching doom. From the poorest worker to the wealthiest merchant, from the youngest child to the eldest sage, they gathered in the vast courtyard before the palace. What they expected was a call to arms, a mobilization of troops, perhaps even an evacuation plan. What they would receive instead was a revelation about the true source of their city's strength, one that would shock them to their very foundations and redefine their understanding of what it truly meant to be protected. The great courtyard had never held so many souls at once. Thousands pressed together beneath the towering walls, adorned with glazed lions and dragons, their faces etched with the same question that burned in every heart. How would their king save them from certain destruction? The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the crowd, but none complained of the heat when death itself marched toward their beloved city. King Hammurabi III emerged from the palace wearing neither armor nor ceremonial robes of war. Instead, he wore the simple white garment of a teacher, his graying beard carefully groomed, his eyes holding a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. As he approached the elevated platform where royal proclamations had been made for centuries, a profound silence fell over the assembly. Even the children stopped their restless movements, sensing the gravity of this moment. "My people of Babylon," the king began, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space without strain or urgency. "News has reached us of armies approaching our gates. Cities have fallen, families have fled their homes, fear walks among us like an unwelcome guest at our tables." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, heads nodding in grim acknowledgement of their shared terror. Commander Asher stood at attention near the platform, his hand instinctively resting on his sword hilt. He expected the king to call for weapon counts, to demand every able-bodied man report for military service, to order the forging of spears and shields through the night. Instead, Hammurabi's next words struck him like a physical blow. "But I tell you today that Babylon's strength does not lie in the bronze of our weapons or the height of our walls," the king continued, his gaze sweeping across faces that ranged from hopeful to bewildered. "Our safety comes not from what we can take from our enemies, but from what we have built within ourselves and among ourselves." In the crowd, Miriam clutched her daughter's hand tighter. Like others around her, she had expected promises of military victory, assurances that Babylon's armies would ride out to meet the threat. Instead, the king spoke of building something within themselves. What could he possibly mean when barbarian hordes threatened to burn everything they held dear? Young Ezra's stylus moved rapidly across his clay tablet, but his mind struggled to comprehend the direction of the royal speech. This was unlike any wartime address recorded in the royal archives. Where were the battle plans? Where was the call to courage in combat? Where were the promises of glory for those who would die defending their homeland? "The enemies who approach us seek our gold," King Hammurabi declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They desire our women and children as slaves. They would plunder our temples and destroy our sacred places. But what they truly covet, what makes Babylon the jewel of all nations, cannot be taken by force or destroyed by fire." The crowd leaned forward as one, hungry for understanding. High Priest Darius felt his heart racing as he recognized something profound in the king's tone, something that reminded him of the ancient wisdom texts he had studied since youth. This was not mere politics or military strategy. This was teaching of the highest order. Tonight, as darkness falls and morning brings our enemies closer, I will share with you the 3 pillars that have always protected Babylon, though many have forgotten their power, the king announced. These pillars cannot be broken by siege engines or conquered by superior numbers. They are the foundation upon which our prosperity was built, and they shall be the shield that preserves us now. The king paused, allowing his words to sink deep into every listening heart before delivering his final statement of the day. "Tomorrow, you will understand why I promise you safety not through war, but through wisdom." The night brought no rest to Babylon. In homes throughout the city, families gathered around oil lamps, their conversations turning repeatedly to the king's cryptic words. What were these 3 pillars he spoke of? How could wisdom protect them when bronze-tipped spears and iron swords marched ever closer? The very air seemed thick with uncertainty, and many citizens found themselves questioning whether their beloved monarch had lost his mind under the pressure of impending doom. Miriam sat with her daughter Leah in their modest dwelling near the merchant quarter, counting the silver pieces she had saved over years of careful trading. "Mother," Leah whispered, "should we bury our treasures like the neighbors are doing? Should we flee to the countryside before it's too late?" The young woman's eyes reflected the fear that gripped every household, the terrible anticipation of losing everything they had worked to build. "Your father always said that King Hammurabi possessed wisdom beyond his years," Miriam replied, though her voice carried doubt. "But wisdom has never stopped a sword thrust or turned away cavalry charges. Perhaps we should prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." She wrapped her most precious jewelry in cloth, her hands trembling, as she considered whether these might be her final peaceful moments with her daughter. Meanwhile, in the barracks, Commander Asher called his officers together for what he believed might be their last strategic meeting. Maps spread across wooden tables showed the approaching enemy forces, their numbers growing more terrifying with each scout report. "The king speaks of wisdom," growled Captain Marcus, a veteran of many campaigns, "but our enemies understand only strength. If we don't mobilize our forces immediately, there won't be a city left to protect with philosophy." Asher stared at the flickering lamp flames, his mind torn between loyalty to his king and responsibility to his men. "I have served 3 rulers," he said slowly. "Never have I seen Hammurabi make a decision based on fear or foolishness. There must be something we don't understand yet." But even as he spoke these words of faith, his hand unconsciously moved to check his weapon, a gesture that revealed his own deep uncertainty. In the Temple of Marduk, High Priest Darius knelt in solitary prayer, searching ancient texts for guidance. The sacred scrolls spoke of kings who had protected their people through divine wisdom, but the specific nature of such protection remained mysterious. "Great Marduk," he whispered, "grant me understanding of your servant's plan. Help me see what my eyes cannot yet perceive." The golden statue seemed to glow in the lamplight, but offered no clear answers to the priest's desperate questions. Young Ezra worked late into the night, reviewing his transcription of the king's speech and comparing it to historical records of other royal addresses during times of crisis. Never before had a Babylonian king addressed external threats without mentioning military preparations. The scribe's training told him to trust in royal wisdom, but his youth made him wonder if perhaps the older generation had grown too comfortable in their prosperity to face harsh realities. As dawn approached, scouts brought news that made every heart sink. The enemy forces had camped just beyond the horizon. By the next sunset, they would be at Babylon's gates. Throughout the city, people prepared for what many believed would be their final day of freedom. Yet somehow, impossibly, King Hammurabi seemed to grow more serene as the danger increased, as if he alone possessed knowledge that transformed terror into confidence. Soon his people would discover whether his promised safety was built on profound wisdom or dangerous delusion. The second day dawned with an urgency that gripped every soul in Babylon. King Hammurabi once again called his people to assembly, but this time the crowd gathered with desperate hunger for answers. Enemy campfires had been visible throughout the night, glowing like malevolent stars on the distant plains. Time for riddles and philosophy had run out. The barbarian horde would reach their gates before another sunrise. "Yesterday, I spoke to you of 3 pillars," the king began, his voice carrying the same inexplicable calm that had both comforted and disturbed his people. "Today, as our enemies draw near, I will reveal what they are and why they make Babylon truly invincible." He raised his hand toward the great ziggurat that dominated their city's skyline. "The first pillar is the protection of our gold, not the hoarding of wealth in fear, but the disciplined preservation of what we have earned through wisdom and labor." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the assembly. Commander Asher felt his jaw clench with frustration. What good would saved gold do against 50,000 warriors? Yet the king continued, his words taking an unexpected turn that gradually captured every listener's attention. "For generations, our merchants have followed the ancient law. Pay yourselves first from every transaction, save 1/10 of all earnings, and invest wisely for the future." This discipline has not only built individual prosperity, but created a city where every citizen has resources to contribute when crisis comes. Our gold is not weakness. It is strength distributed among all our people. Miriam's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. She thought of her carefully saved silver, of the reserves that every responsible merchant maintained, of the way Babylonian prosperity had grown not through conquest, but through the patient accumulation of wealth by thousands of disciplined citizens. Suddenly, the king's words carried new meaning. "The second pillar," Hammurabi declared, "is the protection of our families, not through hiding them away, but by building bonds so strong that no force can break them apart." His gaze swept across the crowd, finding faces he had known since childhood. "In Babylon, we do not abandon our neighbors in times of trouble. We do not betray our friends for personal gain. We do not let the weak suffer while the strong prosper alone." Young Ezra's stylus paused as he felt something powerful stirring in his chest. He looked around at the thousands gathered together, not as subjects cowering before a distant ruler, but as a community united by shared values and mutual support. In other cities, he realized, nobles would already have fled with their wealth, leaving common people to face destruction alone. "The third pillar," the king continued, his voice now resonating with profound authority, is the protection of our temples and the wisdom they contain. This means preserving not just our buildings, but our laws, our knowledge, our commitment to justice and righteousness that makes us more than mere barbarians ourselves. High Priest Darius felt tears forming in his eyes as the king's strategy finally became clear. This was not about defeating enemies through superior violence. This was about demonstrating that Babylon possessed something so valuable, so enviable, that even conquerors would choose to preserve it rather than destroy it. When our enemies arrive tomorrow, King Hammurabi concluded, they will find not a city paralyzed by fear, but a people united by purpose. They will discover that our greatest treasures cannot be taken by force. And perhaps, if we are wise enough and strong enough in our unity, they will choose to join us rather than destroy us. The third dawn brought with it the thunder of 50,000 feet marching across the plains toward Babylon. From the city walls, sentries could see the dust clouds stretching to the horizon, punctuated by glinting spear points and the savage war cries that had terrorized 3 fallen cities. Yet something remarkable had happened within Babylon's walls during the night. Instead of panic, there was purpose. Instead of chaos, there was coordination beyond anything the city had ever experienced. Throughout the merchant quarter, families had worked together to secure their wealth, not in individual hiding places, but in community vaults, where neighbors stood guard for neighbors. Miriam found herself amazed at how naturally this cooperation had emerged. "Leah," she said to her daughter as they carried their most precious items to the communal storehouse, "I never realized how many people I trusted until trust became a matter of survival." Commander Asher stood atop the Great Wall, but his perspective had transformed completely since the king's revelation. Instead of calculating defensive positions and weapon placements, he watched his people moving with disciplined unity through the streets below. Families were gathering not to flee, but to organize. Merchants were pooling resources not from fear, but from strength. The city had become something he had never seen before, a single organism with 50,000 hearts beating in harmony. When the barbarian horde finally crested the final hill and spread across the plain before Babylon like a dark tide, their leader Ragnar expected to see the familiar signs of a city about to fall. He had witnessed it 3 times already. Walls crowded with desperate defenders, smoke rising from buildings as people burned what they could not carry, streams of refugees fleeing through rear gates with whatever possessions they could manage. Instead, Ragnar saw something that made him pause in confusion. Babylon's gates stood open. No defenders manned the walls. No arrows flew from the towers. The city seemed almost to be inviting invasion. Yet there was something profoundly unsettling about this apparent surrender. The barbarian chief had conquered through fear and chaos. But this serene confidence was something entirely outside his experience. King Hammurabi walked alone through those open gates, wearing the same simple white robe he had worn when addressing his people. No guards accompanied him, no weapons adorned his belt. He approached the vast barbarian army with the calm dignity of a man meeting guests for a peaceful negotiation. Behind him, visible through the open gates, Babylon continued its daily life with an orderliness that seemed almost supernatural. "I am Ragnar the Destroyer," the barbarian leader announced, his voice carrying across the space between them. "I have burned 3 cities to ash. I have taken the wealth of nations. Surrender your gold, your women, and your children, and perhaps some of you will live to serve us." "I am Hammurabi, king of Babylon," came the steady reply. "I offer you something far more valuable than anything you could take by force." The king gestured toward his city, where citizens could be seen going about their work with calm efficiency. "I offer you the chance to learn the secrets that built the greatest city in the world. I offer you the wisdom that creates wealth rather than merely stealing it." Ragnar laughed, but his laughter carried a note of uncertainty. Never had a conquered king spoken to him with such confidence. Never had he seen a city that seemed to welcome his arrival rather than cower before it. Something was happening here that challenged everything he understood about power and conquest. What happened next would be spoken of in hushed tones around fires for generations to come. Ragnar, the man who had never met resistance he could not crush, found himself face to face with something that his bronze weapons and savage warriors could not conquer. King Hammurabi invited the barbarian leader and his captains into Babylon itself, where they witnessed something that shattered every assumption they held about power and prosperity. Walking through the city streets, Ragnar saw merchants who had not hidden their goods, but displayed them openly, trusting their neighbors to guard what they could not watch themselves. He saw families who had not scattered in terror, but gathered together, their strength multiplied rather than divided by crisis. He witnessed workers continuing their crafts, priests maintaining their rituals, and children playing in courtyards, while their parents worked with calm efficiency to prepare for whatever might come. "This makes no sense," growled one of Ragnar's captains. "Where is their fear? Where is their desperation? Every city breaks when we approach. Why does this one grow stronger?" The barbarian warriors, accustomed to inspiring terror wherever they rode, found themselves increasingly uncomfortable in a place where their presence seemed to matter less than the daily rhythms of civilized life. Commander Asher joined the group as they toured the city, no longer as a military defender but as a proud citizen, showing visitors the marvels of Babylonian society. "You see," he explained to the bewildered barbarians, "we learned long ago that strength shared is strength multiplied. When each person protects not only themselves but their neighbors, the entire city becomes unconquerable." Miriam and Leah encountered the group near the marketplace, where the mother was teaching her daughter the principles of fair trade that had built their family's prosperity. "Great warrior," Miriam addressed Ragnar directly, "you speak of taking our wealth, but our true wealth is not gold that can be stolen. It is the knowledge of how to create gold through honest work, wise saving, and mutual cooperation. This knowledge grows stronger when shared, not weaker." Young Ezra presented Ragnar with clay tablets containing the laws and customs that governed Babylonian society. "These writings contain the secrets of building prosperity that lasts for generations," he explained. "They teach how to accumulate wealth through discipline, how to strengthen families through loyalty, and how to honor the divine through justice. No army can steal this wisdom because it lives in the hearts and minds of our people." High Priest Darius showed the visitors through the Temple of Marduk, where sacred texts preserved centuries of accumulated wisdom about leadership, commerce, and human nature. "Destruction is easy," the elderly priest observed. "Any fool with a torch can burn a building. But creation requires patience, knowledge, and cooperation. Which legacy would you rather leave your children?" As the day progressed, something unprecedented began to happen among Ragnar's warriors. Men who had lived by taking what others built found themselves asking questions about how to build something themselves. Veterans of countless raids wondered aloud what it might feel like to create rather than destroy, to be welcomed as friends rather than feared as enemies. That evening, as the sun set over Babylon, Ragnar made a decision that shocked his own army. Instead of giving orders to attack, he asked King Hammurabi to teach him and his people the three pillars that had created such impossible strength. The promise of safety had been kept not through superior force, but through demonstrating that some treasures are too valuable to destroy and too wonderful not to possess through peaceful means.